Hi, everybody. I'm so happy to be with you today. I'm Nanci Bell, and it's my great pleasure to have so many of you joining me for the first in a series of what I'm calling Your Great Learning Adventure. First of all, I'm going to talk to you for about the next 15 or 20 minutes, depending on how passionate I get about this. It could go a little bit longer. I'm going to talk to you and teach you how to diagnose from a learning ability evaluation. That's my goal. You're going to be my parent or my teachers for a specific set of students that we're going to work with. Let's get started. First of all, the learning ability evaluation is extremely important in determining your child's strengths, weaknesses in terms of processing language, but more important than that, the cause of any weaknesses. As you can see on the screen, I have chosen to put a variety of pictures of students that we've worked with in the past. And the reason that I'm showing kindergarten through 12th grade is that's the pipeline that we put our children through grade after grade until they hopefully graduate. And so many of the children that we see have fallen below their grade level for one reason or another. And we have lots of phone calls coming to us from parents or teachers asking if we can help these children or adults. To date, Lindamood-Bell is 30 years old, and we've worked with more than 35,000 students. So it's my choice today to talk to you about what a learning evaluation is, and let's see if we can make this work, and have you go through 4 students with me. The first one we're going to talk about is Luke. He's 12 years old. He has a prior diagnosis of dyslexia, and he's had many years of special education. He is currently still in special education. The next student we're going to talk about is Piper. She's a 7th grader. She's quiet and shy. She excelled in reading in the primary grades, and she had no prior diagnosis in coming to us. The next one is Chip. His prior diagnosis is of autism. He's been labeled on the spectrum. He's 6 years old. He doesn't communicate easily. And the last one we're going to talk about is Maggie. She's in her first year of community college. However, even though she graduated from high school and she made it to a community college, she's now on academic probation. You're going to help me figure out why. She's frustrated, she has low self-esteem, and again, no prior diagnosis. So the question for you and me is why? Why is this happening to those 4 students, and what about all the thousands of students that we've worked with? So we're going to try to do this. We're going to talk about the primary cause. We're going to talk about the component parts of reading, and then we're going to actually look at their learning evaluations. Here we go. I need to give you some history before we can identify the strengths and weaknesses of those 4 students. First of all, when we look at those students that come through our learning centers, and they're maybe in 6th grade, reading at a, here, I guess that would be 6th grade. 6th grade reading at a 2nd grade level, or maybe they're in 8th grade and their reading is at the 10th grade level, but they're having some difficulty comprehending. We see that there's these 2 primary weaknesses. Yes, they can have weakness in oral vocabulary. They can have weakness following directions. They can have a variety of other weaknesses, but these are the primary ones that we see that prevent them from being successful in school. Weak decoding and weak comprehension. While there's 2 primary weaknesses that prevent them from being successful, there's one primary cause, and I'm excited to talk to you about that today because the field of reading's been all over the place in trying to identify causes. And this cause is weakness in the imagery-language connection. It's called dual coding, being able to create mental representations and connect those mental representations and have an integration, if you want to think of it that way, between your nonverbal and your verbal code. So a long time ago, many years ago, what I said was the sensory input of imagery underlies language and literacy skills. So keep that in mind as we go through these students. Now, the next most important thing I want you to know in our short time together is that there's two types of imagery. When I first started doing this, I thought that there was just imagery was imagery, and that turned out not to be the case. I was working with a college student who had been labeled dyslexic and was trying desperately to get through school. He was on academic probation, and his comprehension was excellent, and I asked him, what do you do to comprehend like that? This was many years ago, more than 30 years ago, and he said, I make movies when I read. And I said, what do you do? And he said, I make movies when I read. And everything I read, he said, just turns into movies, and is that not the right thing to do? And I said, well, no, I guess I make movies when I read too. And that was kind of my start into the world of imagery. And what you're going to see now, 30 years later, is the result of a lot of experience with this and a lot of research. So, two types of imagery, parts and wholes. Keep all of that in mind. There's symbol imagery, that is your ability to create mental representations for sounds and letters within words, and that is what is needed to have a student ultimately be a global reader, where they have memorized a lot of sight words and don't have to sound out every word because they have been taught a phonological program that, while it's certainly important to do that, it is not the end game. And if you are primarily sounding out words when you're reading in context, here we are reading in context, then you are what is called an analytical reader rather than a global reader. And so symbol imagery, research has absolutely shown, is important for orthographic processing. Now, here's the new person on the block for you and for many. And that is the type of imagery that creates a whole or a gestalt. So what I've written down here is that's concept imagery, and it's an imaged whole, and it is for both oral language and written language. Keep all that in mind now as we look at the component parts of reading. A number of years ago, in the 70s, I attended Harvard University in the summer and took a reading program. And I was very surprised that there was a feeling that there were so many parts of reading that it was too complicated to understand it. So one person was saying it was phonological, another person was saying, no, it's a guessing game, etc. But the fact is that reading has component parts. So there's this part, and that's word attack. There's this part, that is word recognition. There's this part, that is paragraph reading and vocabulary, and all of those are subsets of the greater set of comprehension. Now the question is, I'm going to go to the next slide where I didn't have to have you try to read my scribbles. Then the question is, of those component parts of auditory or word attack, visual word recognition or language, paragraph reading and fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension being the only reason to read, of those component parts, how does imagery play a role? So for auditory, it's phonological processing for word attack. For visual, it's orthographic processing for word recognition. And for language, it's contextual reading and vocabulary. And then there is comprehension. The slide I showed you that has symbol imagery and concept imagery underlies all of those. Symbol imagery underlies the subsets, word attack, word recognition, and fluency. There's no question that phonological awareness that people have been talking about largely because of Pat Lindamood's work. There's no question that phonological awareness underlies word attack, but so does symbol imagery. Got it? Now, let's look at these two cases. This is Buzz. See if I can put Buzz someplace. And this is Sophie. Now, this says to you, imagery in the language processing spectrum. I think of language processing as moving from decoding to comprehension. Buzz is a student that has weakness in word attack, word recognition, and paragraph reading. If his weakness is severe enough, he can be one of those students that's maybe in 5th grade reading at a 2nd grade level, okay? But his comprehension is good. If now we move to Sophie, Sophie has no weakness in here. This is all intact for her, and her weakness is in comprehension. So Sophie is, we'll make her in 6th grade, and her decoding, her subsets in here are all excellent. She's reading above her grade level, but her comprehension is 2 or 3 years below. And if his weakness is severe enough, it can be labeled dyslexia. If her weakness is severe enough, it can be labeled hyperlexia and making its way all the way to autism. Unfortunately, let me erase some of this so that I can talk to you a little bit more. Of Buzz and Sophie, if there's weakness in dyslexia, if there's weakness in decoding, it's pretty obvious because he might look at stream and say steam. He might look at breakfast and say basket. Or he might look at immigration and say imagination. So it's obvious, or he might misspell a word. So it's obvious that he's got some weakness. Sophie's weakness is not as easily discerned. And a parent told me in Los Angeles many years ago, it's like the hidden weakness, the hidden disability that people don't really see easily. So let's look at what we can find out from that learning evaluation. First of all, I'm going to show you a couple of slides here. The evaluation that we do is lengthy. It's 3 to 4 hours, and we go through a number of tests. We look at, these are standardized tests, they're not tests that we made up. Well-recognized tests in the field of education. We'll look at standard scores, percentiles, age equivalents, and grade equivalents on each of these tests. I'm going to talk to you about percentiles because it's easier for me as we get into looking at our students. It's easier for you to think of whether it's a strength or a weakness if we look at that compared to standard scores. So we look at word opposites, verbal absurdities, oral directions, word attack, word recognition. Here, word reading, spelling, math. We look at paragraph reading and whether or not the student can comprehend. We look at a phoneme awareness test. It's probably the best test on the market. We look at a symbol imagery test. We look at whether or not the students can recognize sounds and letters. We look at math. We look at reading comprehension, the more complex reading comprehension tests that we give. We look at writing, and we have a preschool assessment that we do down here for the younger students that we see. So I'm going to take all of those tests and look with you at just specific tests that I think are more relevant for those reading circles, those component parts. So we're not going to look at each of those students. We're not going to go through the whole battery. So here's our 4 case studies, and we're going to look at these students and see where they fall in terms of, in terms of their word attack skills, their word recognition skills, their paragraph reading, vocabulary, and comprehension. So let's start with Luke. There's a little bit more information on Luke. Now, I want you to pretend with me. You're Luke's parent. This is the most important person in your life, or one of them. And you have helped Luke and seen his frustration as he goes from grade to grade to grade, and you finally make your way for a learning ability evaluation, and you're hoping for some help because nothing is really changing for him since he was in first grade. He struggled in first grade to acquire reading skills, and now here he is in sixth grade with the same problem. He is 12 years old. He's very sweet. He struggled to learn to read. He's been in special education since second grade. He's had many different phonologically based reading programs, and really years of frustration and self-doubt. Now, by the time he's in sixth grade and you're making your way to a Lindamood-Bell Learning Center for an evaluation, he thinks that he's the problem. Not that somebody didn't diagnose what he needed, but that he thinks that he's the problem. So here we go. We're going to put his test scores into our reading circles. And remember, I'm going to talk to you about percentiles. And I wanted to just take a moment and show you how you can think about those before we move on. Normal range is 25th to 75th. Below the 25th percentile, so if I put it over here, here's the first percentile, and here's the 99th percentile. 25th to 75th is normal range. Anything below the 25th is considered a weakness. Anything above the 75th is considered a strength. So here you go. Here's Luke. Here's our circles that you're going to be looking at with me. First thing that you might notice is that Luke is in sixth grade, but he's 12 years old. And the fact is, he's not only has he been in special ed, but he has also been retained. So let's just see what has happened at this point in time where he is. On the Peabody Picture Vocabulary Test, which is a receptive oral vocabulary test where the student is shown 4 pictures and the examiner says a word like elephant, and the student has to say which picture is elephant. So the student does not have to have expressive language. He is at the 75th percentile. So I'm asking you, of the hundreds that are watching, is that a strength or a weakness? Right. It is right at the top of normal range, verging on a strength. So what we know is this is a measure of his potential. Does he have the potential to learn to read? That's my question to you. I hope you're shaking your head. Absolutely, he does. So now if we look at word attack, which is right here, he's at the 86th percentile in word attack. How is that? Absolutely a strength. And why do you think that is? Because he has had some good phonologically based programs, including our own. If we look at his word recognition, that is at the 37th percentile. So whereas his word attack is intact, largely, his ability to recognize words instantly is not. If we look at his ability to follow oral directions, how is that? Again, good. Now let's take a look at him in paragraph reading. So we're going to pop over to that circle. His reading rate is the 10th percentile. Look at the gap between his vocabulary and his reading rate. Worse than that, look at the gap between his word attack skills and his ability to read those paragraphs accurately. So what that means is when Luke is reading in context, even though he has this strength in word attack skills, he's reading slowly because when he was examined, when you observed him, he was guessing, he was popping words in and out, and he was not accurately able to read those paragraphs and became very frustrated. His fluency, and fluency, by the way, is a combination of rate and accuracy. That's how you get a fluency score. So we know that word recognition needs to be improved. We know that his paragraph reading is not what it should be compared to his percentile, compared to his Peabody. How is his comprehension? Look at that. He does not have substantive comprehension weakness. You can see it here in following directions. That was good for him. That's oral language. You can see it here in written language that he comprehends more than he can decode. So he's one of those students, for me, that we would be saying to ourselves, if we can get this developed for him, those subsets, those inner circles, he is very likely to have good comprehension. If we look at his phonological awareness, it was at the 50th percentile. His imagery, remember that's the imaging letters and words, that's extremely important for memorizing orthographic patterns, is at the 25th percentile. So if I take you back, let me take you back here. You can see that for us, this is an easy diagnosis. I'm not saying it's easy for him, but for us, he's clearly a student that we would work on symbol imagery to develop this one. This one's already largely intact. Develop that one and apply all of that over here, and then he should be working to his potential, honestly. Let's move on to our next student. This is Piper, if you remember her. She's in 7th grade. She excelled in reading in the primary grade, so if we put our pipeline up there, when she was in 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade, really she was the top student in her class. She was the top reader. However, in 4th grade, she began to have experienced difficulty answering questions. She began to have to read things more than once. And then when the question was asked, as the material became more complicated, she had some trouble. But here's where it really began to be tough for her. In 5th and 6th grade, her parents were told she wasn't paying attention. If she would just sit up more or try harder, she would do better in school, because no one could understand why was she doing so well in 1st and 2nd and 3rd grade and not doing well now in 5th and 6th. And I think you probably have figured out the answer to that. In 1st and 2nd grade, in those primary grades, largely the emphasis on how well you decode, the comprehension is not very structured or difficult. But here's a real problem for her. She's now in 7th grade and she has social issues. She doesn't quite follow conversation around her, responds emotionally to situations, seems to not quite get it. And she's now starting to say to her parents that there's something wrong with her. In fact, there's been a lot of tears for her before she goes to school. So let's see how Piper does as we now look at her evaluation. Here she is, 7th grade. On the Peabody Picture Vocabulary Test, she's at the 58th percentile. And you know about percentiles now, so how is that? Right in the middle, essentially. She should have no trouble in 5th, 6th, and 7th grade in comprehending the material. Look at this one. Her word attack skills, 99th percentile. Her word recognition skills, 99th percentile. So let's color those in. Those are absolutely intact. In fact, before we go on to this one, let's just jump down here and see what she does reading paragraphs. Her reading rate is 84th, her accuracy is 95th, her fluency is 91st. So we need to color those in. And thinking to ourselves, we don't need to work on those. We don't want to waste time trying to teach her something she already can do really well. But you can also see if she's at the 99th percentile on word attack and word recognition, now you know why in these early grades she was doing so well in school. So let's go back and look at her ability to follow directions, an oral language test, the 37th percentile. Now if we drop down here to her reading comprehension, it's at the 25th percentile. So I hope that you're gasping to see that here is somebody that can decode, can sound out words, can recognize words, can read in paragraphs lightning fast, and yet her comprehension is the 25th percentile. Her ability to do the LAC test with little colored blocks was at the 86th percentile, measuring her phonological awareness, and her symbol imagery was also at the 86th percentile. So if I take you back, where's her weakness? Is it this circle? No. Is it this circle? This one was the 99th percentile. Is it this one? No, 99th percentile. Is it reading in paragraphs? I don't remember what it was. 91st percentile. And now we have to look at the only reason to read, and that's comprehension. Do you remember what it was? 25th percentile. And that was not caused by the fact that she didn't have good oral vocabulary. It was that she was not creating mental representations for the languages that came in. So what was happening to her, I'm going to take a little bit of time with this, is as the language came in, and this is what so many individuals have told me, it goes essentially in one ear and out the other, but it's not like it's completely gone. It is that individuals with this weakness are processing or remembering parts. Remember I said that there's two types of imagery. What she's not able to get is the gestalt, where she creates a mental representation for the whole of it. Without that gestalt, then she cannot answer higher order thinking skill questions like of main idea, inference, etc., because all of those require processing from the gestalt. I am going to be speaking at a university in the United Kingdom in May on what they call aphantasia, and that is they're now thinking that there are some students, some individuals that cannot or do not create mental representations, and I'm excited to go there and say, I think for 30 years we've been seeing those students, and I think that we can teach them how to create mental representations. Their question is, what does a lack of imagery do to our culture? And I can tell you for sure, a lack of imagery, especially of this type, impacts your ability to comprehend. I can't tell you how many students I've seen when I was first working on the Visualizing Verbalizing program, what we fondly call VV. I can't tell you how many students, and adults included, that I would say, what are you picturing? And they would say, look at me with sort of a smile. Nothing, it's just dark up there. So when someone has that weakness, you can see a range of symptoms. These are the ones I've already talked about, but difficulty following logical thinking and following directions. But these are the other ones. I'll leave that up there for a second for you just to read through them quickly. They can have difficulty interpreting social situations, and you can see that some of these absolutely apply to students diagnosed on the autism spectrum. So let's look at the student on that spectrum. This is another student that we've worked with. His name is Chip. I've actually changed his name, but these are real students I'm talking to you about. He's 6 years old. His prior diagnosis was autism. He's had years of speech therapy. He has difficulty communicating. He has had a variety of programs to help him with his autism spectrum disorder. Here he is. Let's see how he fits in this. 6 years old, grade 1. First of all, if we look at his P-body, remember that's a receptive oral vocabulary test. It's good. I didn't put it on here, but his ability to verbalize opposites, it's a test called the Detroit Test of Word Opposites, was not that high. It was the 10th percentile. His word attack, his wide range, his word recognition, how are those if you put them up in here? They're good, right? His ability to follow oral directions is, compared to his vocabulary, he's the 2nd percentile. Now if you look at him reading in paragraphs, remember this is a paragraph reading test. He's at the 25th percentile and the 37th percentile in rate and accuracy, and when you combine them, it puts his fluency at the 25th percentile. And so, that's within normal range, the 25th percentile being at the bottom. But here's the big concern. His ability to comprehend what he's reading, just like Piper, only more severe, is below the first percentile. His phonological awareness test was the 25th percentile, and I think largely that was because it was difficult for him to follow the directions for both the symbol imagery test and the phonological awareness test. So if I take him back, what are we going to say is his primary weakness? Is it symbol imagery that we want to work on with him? Is it concept imagery? What do you think? This program is called Seeing Stars. This one is called Visualizing and Verbalizing. They developed two distinct types of imagery. I hope you got it. It is here. We're going to do VV with him first. And visualizing and verbalizing, you can see that by doing verbalizing with him or the Talkies program, that's a precursor to VV, we can help him become more verbal. Last one, Maggie. She's in college, but after a year, she's now on academic probation. She began to struggle in middle school. What does this look like? She's now really struggling out here, but somewhere in here, just like Piper, she began to have trouble. Many have thought she doesn't try nor apply herself. She was never identified for special education, and she did unsuccessful content tutoring in high school. Let's look at her. I put her in purposely because she's not as clear-cut as some of the other students that we've been looking at. Peabody, good. Word attack is really just okay. If this was my daughter, I would not want her to be at the 37th percentile. If she's got the potential at the 50th percentile, why wouldn't this be at least at that level? Wide range, again, same kind of thing. So if we come up here and now we look at Maggie in these circles, I do think she needs some help in here. You agree? I mean, why not? We can do it. Here's her larger problem, however. Her bigger weakness is in language comprehension. She's at the 10th percentile in oral language, and she's at the 10th percentile in written language comprehension. So you can see, I know you're getting this, that if we're looking at my Venn diagram, we're going to focus our work on comprehension for sure. But if you also look at these, there isn't any reason why we can't improve her reading rate and her accuracy by doing some work in these inner circles. She was the 50th percentile in the phonological awareness test, but only the 37th percentile in symbol imagery. So for me, this is a student that I would do both symbol imagery and concept imagery. Now, if you're thinking to yourself, well, her phonological awareness needs to be improved, I couldn't agree more that we're going to improve that. But ultimately, where she's got to end up is with an imagery-language connection. Well, that is essentially the end of what I wanted to talk to you about. I want to leave you with just a couple of thoughts here. These are all these students that we have seen. And here's my goal. Every time a student comes through our doors, our goal is that we help them be independent. They can only be independent in processing language if they can self-correct, if they can see where something is not matching. They don't need someone standing over them and saying, no, that's not the way that word is spelled. No, that's not how I pronounce that word. Or no, that's not what that sentence means. If you're going to be independent, you have to be the person that notices that. And noticing it means you have to be able to monitor if you're right or wrong or a little bit gray. But you can only monitor if you have the sensory input of imagery. The cause of the problem is not poor teaching, it's not socioeconomic, it's not gender specific. The primary cause is in sensory input And it's the sensory input of imagery that allows these students to make the kinds of gains that they make. And so what kinds of gains they make will depend on the learning evaluation that's going to identify strengths and weaknesses and a specific weakness in the sensory input of imagery. Because once that has been identified, then and only then can you focus the instruction and focus the imagery, whether it's symbol imagery or concept imagery or both. So here's just the last thought for you. I told you that what we're talking about is dual coding theory. That's a theory of cognition that Dr. Pavio came up with. And I did not know about that when we were first working with students. None of us knew that really about dual coding theory. And so what happened was our experience met the theory. And he says performance is mediated by the joint activity, performance being in thinking and reading is thinking, by the joint activity of our verbal and our nonverbal systems. So this is language and this is imagery. Cognition is always an interplay between the verbal and the nonverbal systems. So as we have progressed over the 30 years, we've conducted a lot of research in-house and a lot of research in schools. These are the most current ones. I just thought I'd show you what these are. This is important for you because it's neurological and behavioral research. The first one that you see there is Georgetown University, a research study that we did with the Center for the Study of Learning, and that was with Seeing Stars, so it was for symbol imagery. And what was noted was that gray matter volume changes following Seeing Stars instruction with dyslexic children. What was noticed was their improvements in reading ability, and this is so interesting, were accompanied by changes in brain structure. But not only did that brain structure change during the intervention, it also continued to grow after the intervention. So something substantive happened neurologically. MIT, we just did a study a year ago, maybe 2 years ago. Impact of intensive summer reading intervention for children with reading disabilities and difficulties in early elementary school. The question was, we were the intervention, the experimental group, and our group of Seeing Stars students showed gains across the summer versus stagnation or score declines in the control group. So the question was, could we either make gains or stay where these students were when they got out of school so that they did not have the great decline that happens often in the summer? And yes, our students did. And probably the most exciting for me is for the research that we've done working with students that have been identified as ASD. This is the University of Alabama at Birmingham. Changes in intrinsic connectivity of the brain's reading network following intervention in children with autism. The study revealed widespread changes in functional connectivity as a result of VV, that's concept imagery, intervention with children with ASD. So that's it. Join me for a continuation of your great learning adventure into summer instruction, where I'm going to show you what it's like to bring your student to a learning center. And again, I'm hoping to make it about 20 minutes. I won't be able to show you a lot of instruction, but I'll show you parts of it. And here's the last thing that I want to leave you with. I absolutely believe passionately, as I think everybody that works with us, that children and adults can be taught to read and comprehend as long as you get to the root cause and the sensory input of imagery. Thank you all. If you have a question, here's where you go with it. And I'll be trying to answer those questions, as will some of our other staff. Thanks so much.